and his disciples believed in him. That's what the miracles are all about, my friends. And we have seen miracles with people in this church and friends and relatives. So I know I'm talking to the choir when I say miracles happen. And his disciples believed in him. Have you ever prayed for a miracle? I'm not talking about one of those really, really big miracles where you're like praying for somebody who is near and dear to you, who is probably near death. I'm talking about the little miracles that sometimes we pray for. Oh Lord, please let that traffic light stay green just a few more seconds. Or looking down at the gas gauge as I did the other day. Oh, please don't let me run out of gas. Or, God, please let our team win. Now, there is a special exception. If it's TCU, it's okay. Is there any miracle? Is there anybody in this room who has ever prayed for that kind of a miracle? Author J. Kessler tells a true story about himself. And he says, shortly after he got his driver's license when he was a young boy, he wrecked his dad's car. The crash tore away the front fender, 2 doors, and the rear fender. And after Jay found out that everybody was all right, he stood there in that ditch and he prayed, "Dear God, I pray that it didn't happen." And he opened his eyes and he saw that the car was still wrecked. So he closed his eyes again and he squinted real hard and he prayed again. "Dear God, please let it not have happened." Then he opened his eyes, but he says, "You know what? It happened anyway." Have you ever been there? Have you ever asked God to move heaven and earth over something trivial, something impossible, something unnecessary, maybe something totally absurd? Oh Lord, please don't let it rain on our special event. Have you ever asked God to change the weather so that it didn't interfere with something that you had planned or a trip?
We'll be leaving soon.
I suspect those are things we have all said in prayer at one time or another. So it's easy to appreciate this lesson from our gospel. You see, in this lesson, Jesus is making his first public appearance right after his baptism. And this public appearance is at a wedding. And that's appropriate and it's interesting because weddings represent God's unity with his church. Weddings are sacred acts and they involve a holy covenant. Also, there are times of great joy and great celebration. But there's a problem at this particular wedding. They're running out of wine. And for the Jews, wine represented life and abundance. So it was important. It was an integral part of any celebration, particularly at a wedding. No more wine, no more party. And what is interesting is that Jesus' mother Mary asks him to intervene. Then she turns to the servants and she says, do whatever he tells you to do. Well, we don't have any idea what Mary expected. It wasn't like Jesus could whip out his cell phone, get the local wine merchant on the line, and have him deliver some more wine. Was she asking Jesus to do the impossible? And you know, he initially resists her request. And it may well be that he was thinking, I don't want to dole out my miracles like party favors. I don't want to do it for the convenience of those around me. You see, Jesus used his miracles for a purpose. He used his miracles to prove his identity, to profoundly affect the people's lives, to further his ministry, and not to be somebody's errand boy. My guess is that this is the problem of many of our requests to God. We ask God to do the trivial, the impossible, the unnecessary. And when we do that, we treat God as if he were our servant and not as our sovereign. When a young athlete comes off of the field and says, God gave us the victory tonight, there are times I want to cringe. I hope when they do that, they're saying, I thank God who gave me a good body so I could play my best. I thank God that he allowed me to have a good mind so I could be alert and aware with my play. You see, if he says, I thank God for the ability to do my best, those things I can understand, and I can say, you're absolutely right. Thank God for all of God's good gifts. But if the athlete is saying, God literally guided that football through the uprights so that one team could win and the other one lose, I'd say that young man has a lot to learn about life and about God. You see, God is not a personal weather expert. He's not a football strategist. He's not a romance matchmaker. He's not a rectifier of our past mistakes. God is God. God is our sovereign, not our servant. It is we who bring our actions into conformance with God's will, not God who brings his actions into conformance with our will. You see, it is very human for us to think because we have something that is so very important to us that that same thing is important to God. But when we compare that concern with the millions of trials that the refugees throughout the world in Syria, Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere have, then even the most theologically unsophisticated of us must realize the absurdity of our requests. Miracles are not designed for the trivial, the impossible, or the unnecessary. And having said that, I have to acknowledge, as I'm sure you will too, miracles do occur. You see, Jesus resisted Mary's request at first, but being the good son that he was, he finally did acquiesce to her wishes. There were those 6 stone jars sitting there, and each one of them would hold from 10 to 20 gallons per jar. and they were for the Jewish rites of purification. So Jesus told the servants to fill those jars with water. And when the water had filled the jars, he told them to draw some of the liquid out of the jars and take them to the wine steward. And the wine steward was impressed. He didn't know where this new wine came from, but he knew it was sure better than that they had served the first time. You see, Jesus had performed his first miracle, water to wine. Tony Campolo, who is one of my favorite preachers, theological teachers, writers, tells a story about an experience in his life that occurred when he was 14 years old. Tony's family was very poor, and his father was out of work because he had been struck down with Hodgkin's disease. His hospitalization insurance was running out, and the family didn't know where they were going to get enough money to meet their basic needs for food and clothing and shelter, let alone the insurance and medical costs. And Tony knew at 14 that it was his duty to earn some money for the family. But at the same time, he wanted to continue to go to school and get good grades so that he could go on to college. And he figured out that he could buy unsold loaves of bread off of the truck drivers in West Philadelphia where he lived. And he could buy those loaves of bread for a nickel a loaf. And he could sell them for 25 cents a loaf and make a hefty little profit. Well, he couldn't pick up the bread until after 9 o'clock at night. And the only means he had of delivering the bread was by hooking a wagon up to the rear of his bicycle and driving around. So one dark, cold, rainy night, about 11:15, Tony was making his deliveries. Unfortunately, he rode his bike over a pothole. And suddenly there was a bang. His front tire blew out. He pulled the bike off of the street and he sat down at the curb. After a while, he thought about his situation and he began to cry. He remembers crying long and hard. He was soaked, he was shivering, and he was completely discouraged. And it was a dark, lonely street. There was no one to hear him when he cried out, "God, you're mean. Everybody else thinks you're nice, but I know how mean you are. If you were nice and kind like others say you are, you would help me." Well, he cried for a few minutes more, and then for reasons that he will never figure out, he got up, he pushed his bike and his load of bread trailing along behind in the wagon to a service station down the street, and the service station was closed. Nevertheless, he pulled his bike over to the air pump, and he tried to put air into the blown out tire. It never occurred to him how unusual it was for the air pump to still be working in a station that was closed. And he was in such a state of brokenness and sadness that he did what he did all in a daze. Well, needless to say, as he pumped the air, he kept hearing a loud hiss. The air was coming out of the tire as fast as it was going in. And he says he didn't know what he was expecting, but trembling, crying, he stayed there in the cold, wet, dark, carrying out a hopeless task. Then, the miracle happened. Suddenly, he realized the tire was hard. Somehow, in some way that is impossible to explain, the tire was holding air. He stood up, confused and happy. He remembers yelling out loud, "Oh, thank you, oh, thank you." And he made 2 more deliveries, and then he rode the 3 miles back to his home, and the tire held. When he got home, he lifted the bike onto the front porch, and he locked it. The time was 12:30 in the morning. He went to the front door, and as he was putting his key in the front door, he heard a loud hissing sound. And he looked around, and the air was going quickly out of the blown out tire. The miracle was over, and the tire was flat. Well, I tell you this simple story for this reason. My guess is that everyone with a deep faith can look back over his or her life and see some miracle in their life, such as Tony Campolo experienced in that bicycle event. Many of you can look back and see a similar miracle in your life. You see, the secret of the miracle at the wedding of Cana is found in these words. They're in the 11th verse. This is the first of the signs that Jesus did at Cana of Galilee, and they manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Jesus performed this miracle not to save the bridegroom any embarrassment, not to pacify his mother. Jesus wanted to build the faith of his disciples. He wanted to make sure they knew who he was. And that's the role that miracles play in the life of the believer. God is not our servant. God is our sovereign. God isn't going to do anything for us that ultimately is not for our best good. When we pray and heaven seems to be silent, it is because God's plan is bigger and better than we can see at the moment. But somewhere along the way, God gives us experiences that build our faith, that serve as a watershed along our life's journey. God gives us these events, whether they be miracles or mountaintop experiences, so that when we come to difficult times, when we pray but nothing seems to come our way, we can say with complete confidence, I know God is with me. God has been with me before, and I know that God is with me now. Miracles happen, but they happen for a specific reason, to build faith. So if you pray for your home team to win, and they don't, or if it rains on that very special event of yours, in spite of all the time you spend on your knees begging, remember, that's not what miracles are all about. Miracles are about helping us trust God. And that's the truth about miracles. And his disciples believed in him. Will you?